All right, thanks for coming out, guys. Your regular host is speaking today, so I'm filling in for him. But we're going to say a quick thank you quick shout out to our sponsors, Colab, BPB, Society of Work, those people up there, that logo. Someone tell me what that logo is. The orangey one. Carbon 5, yes. Sorry, guys. I apologize. Shout out to you guys, too. Next week, we're having someone from that logo over there, Carbon 5, come talk to us about his awesome evil Twitter project. This week, we've got Brett Wise talking to us about ground-up product design, and it's going to be awesome. And we do need speakers, so if you're interested, hit Brett up. He's the man. I'm not the man. And let's have the man now, Brett Wise.
Checking it out. All right. Welcome, everybody. Hey, I'm Brett. We'll have my slides up here in just a sec. I think. Okay. Here we go. Woo. So, let's just jump right into this. Quick overview. We're going to talk about what the design sprint is and why you should care about it, what design sprints look like in the real world, and then ideas for adapting design sprints for your use case. So it all starts with this book published back in March. I made my way to it by way of the posts that were coming out of Google Ventures on Medium, and they had great stuff about user interviews and all that kind of stuff. And they announced this, and I was immediately like, okay, I got to snap this up because their stuff is just really great. So the guy here, Jake Knapp, he's been at Google since 2010, and this is where this whole kind of like process started. And then he moved over to Google Ventures in 2012. And so this book is a culmination of all that experience. He's run hundreds of these design sprints. And why you should care is because I think it's probably kind of like the best package, the best kind of like process to quickly iterate for particular problems, and we'll get into like what those particular problems are. But yeah, I would challenge somebody to show me kind of just a better package. A lot of it's really just a grouping of tools and kind of like workshopping and exercises to do in a group setting. And a lot of these tools that we'll talk about, you're probably familiar with if you've been involved in similar processes. So it's not the tools aren't necessarily new, but the way that they're sort of ordered and put together, I think are. So and that's where a lot of the value comes out of it. So it's really great. So what do you need to do this design sprint, right? Well, it's a 5-day process, and you need a team. And the way what that team looks like is it's no more than 7 people, and you need a facilitator. That's a person who's the leader. You need a decider. That's the person who's going to make all the decisions, typically the CEO or whoever's like the product lead. This is the person with whom the buck stops. So this person often is difficult to get involved because they're like, I'm really busy, like there's no way I could possibly take 5 days out of my schedule to do this. Let me just send someone in my stead. That doesn't work, so don't do that. And then you're going to have some other core people that are particularly useful to your process. So what do you need once you have the people? Well, there's a few things. You need whiteboards. You're going to use the whiteboards as kind of a brain dump. You're going to timer because all these things are time boxed to make sure that things don't go completely off the rails. Large and small dot stickers, so these are useful for minimizing endless debate. Use these kind of like for straw polls whenever you need to make decisions about which way to go on certain things. Again, like all this stuff is going to be up on whiteboards or sticky notes. Sticky notes are super important. The idea here is that you just want to make sure that as you go through this kind of long process that you have all this stuff that you can consult throughout it on the walls. And pro tip about the whiteboards, If you don't have them, you can get them at Lowe's for like $9. These like kind of portrait, what do you call them? Shower boards. Yeah, the ones we found had like handles on them and everything. So there's particularly 4 like whiteboards, but they were really cheap, like an order of magnitude cheaper than buying like the large size. So anyway, those are really helpful when you move around the room. So pro tip. This is what the whole process looks like. Like I said, 5 days. On Monday, you're mapping. Tuesday, you're sketching. Wednesday, you're deciding which sketches to go with. And you're also prototyping. You're also storyboarding on Wednesday. And then you take that storyboard and you build your prototype on Thursday. And then Friday, you're testing with real users. So that's briefly what this looks like. This whole process is built around minimizing brainstorming. Brainstorming doesn't work, as it turns out. And there's, I think the sort of the phenomena in operation here that keep brainstorming from working are pretty interesting. There was a 91 meta-analysis of like over 800 teams, and they found conclusively that people working alone on their own generate more ideas and higher quality ideas. So the whole process throughout the 5 days, like every activity that you're going to do and sort of like workshop exercise, is meant to completely cut this kind of stuff out. So there's 4 explanations that I think are particularly interesting why brainstorming doesn't work. One is social loafing, also known as free riding. And the idea here is that when somebody else is around, you're less likely to work hard, also known as like the bystander effect. So the more people that are around, of course, like less likely you're to do something and take action. The other one, of course, is social anxiety, something that we all deal with. You know, obviously this can be complicated by introvertedness. Another really interesting one is called regression to the mean. This is the 3rd one. Regression to the mean is a well-observed phenomenon, especially in sports, where if you pair a much better player with somebody who's less accomplished, that better player will grade their performance down to match the other player's performance. And then also just production blocking. So the idea here is that only one person can talk out loud at a time, and so that really slows down the process. So again, if you can leave with one thing, like never brainstorm again. And if that's one thing you can leave with today, let's just say that. And we're going to show you some ways to kind of get around this and what you can do as an alternative. So, ground rules. There are only 3. The first one is that the facilitator has the controls. They guide this process. You know, like a common question is, okay, like if I get this book and I read it, like how prepared am I going to be? Well, you're going to be more prepared than when the Google Ventures guys like first started out doing this, but there's going to be a lot of room for improvement. And that kind of stuff's only going to come through just experience. Of course, this number 2 rule is the decider is going to make all the tough decisions. Anytime that things start to devolve in endless debate, the facilitator is going to say, okay, let's hold off on this discussion, let's let the decider decide, and push things along that way, because you're always having to keep an eye on the clock, because there's just not enough time. The other big one is that there's no devices in the room, and this is the one that people don't like very much. So they're left at the door. If you need to talk on them, you can use them at breaks, or just step out of the room at any time to use them. So yeah, that's it. It's pretty basic. No other rules than that. So let's just jump right in depth into what this whole process actually looks like day by day. So on Monday, you're going to do what they call starting at the end. And the idea here is that you can't go somewhere unless you know where you're going. Well, I mean, you can go somewhere, but then you're probably going to end up in a place you didn't intend. So just starting at the end, you sort of ask the team, like, where do we want to be in 6 months, a year, 2 years? And sort of like list out all the possible goals, and then you're probably going to go through and kind of like rank them as like most important. Also, along with this process, you're going to talk about your fears. This is like always ends up being a very cathartic experience for the team. And people are like, oh, that feels so good just to get it all out. You know, and this is probably like the kind of stuff that you don't show anybody else, or maybe you do. So after you list your goals and your fears, and you think about sort of like if we didn't reach our goals, like why did we not reach them? That's a whole other exercise. And so by like mid-morning, you've got all this stuff out on the whiteboards, and then you actually start the mapping process. The mapping process, well, why? Does anybody know what this is from? Anybody? Apollo 13. Bingo, Apollo 13. So the worst, well, not the worst, it could have just blown up and everybody died immediately, but second to that, the worst thing happened, right? They're out of oxygen. And so thankfully, during the sprint process, you're not running out of oxygen in the room, so it's a little less high stakes. But the idea here is that when you have a problem that you're trying to solve, right, you start by mapping out what's going on. And yeah, that's the lesson learned from Apollo 13. So your maps are going to end up looking like this. You have these actors that are on the left, and then a simplified kind of experience, like it's customer experience here, right? If you've done customer experience mapping, this looks similar, but often you're going to have other actors that are involved in the process that might intersect with that customer experience. And it should be simple. It should be like 5 to 15 steps, not really any more than that. If it, the maps that I've done, like often they can like really like blow up, and sometimes that's a good thing to do if people aren't really like clear on what this thing like quite looks like or don't have a clear mental model. Sometimes you need to really explore that stuff and then kind of like start to simplify, identify where the important experiences are. In the back here?
Is this a map of your...
This is a great question. The question was, is this a map of the business process or a map for the week? This is a map of the business process or user experience. This one here is by an electronic medical record company that was branching out into matching patients with clinical trials. So you can see here that you always start the step before they could possibly interact with your product, just to give context, and then you move over to like where they first interact with the product, and then on and on and on until finally they reach the goal of the product, which was to begin therapy in the clinical trial. So that's like this is like a perfect map. It's like simplified, and it focuses on the important parts. So once you do this map, you probably don't end up with this. There's probably a lot of things wrong with it. And there's probably other people in your company that know a lot of stuff that the 5 to 7 of you don't know. And so the way that you integrate them is a section called Ask the Experts. And basically, you just bring these people in for like 20 minutes, sit them down in a chair, and let your little crew there interview these people. Basically, you just ask them, where did we get this map wrong? Help us like point out where the weak spots are. And of course, the reason you do that is because nobody knows everything. And as I mentioned, you're just going to talk to one person at a time, and everybody's going to take notes. And this taking notes part is actually a really integral part of this whole process. And one particularly fascinating part and useful thing that I picked up through this, again, this has been around for a long time, is called How Might We? So anybody know kind of like the history of this? So it started in the 70s at Procter & Gamble. And basically, Procter & Gamble were getting their asses beat down by Irish Spring, that fresh strip. So probably most of us in the room aren't old enough to remember that. I'm certainly not. But hey, it's a great story. It lives in this mythical place. And How Might We was born out of this. And it helped them. The product manager at the time came in and said, like, they'd been sitting in this boardroom for days on end trying to figure out like a new idea to beat Irish Spring, their arch rival. And he came in and posed this question. And it's interesting, I think more interesting when you consider what are the alternatives, alternative question formats. So they could be like, how should we, or how can we? And these kind of question formats actually imply either judgment or like the acknowledgement and how can we, like that maybe it's not a possibility. So how might we is just a slight turn in language. and gives people kind of like the confidence to actually consider all the possibilities instead of maybe shutting themselves off right in the beginning. So as the experts are talking, and even throughout the rest of the process, you'll have your little sticky note 3x5s, and you'll be writing HMW at the corner, and then like writing those questions down throughout this whole process. And you'll be later on taking those and putting them on the wall so that you can kind of track all the different ideas and thoughts you had throughout the process. So at the end of the day, after you've asked the experts and they've helped you out, you're going to pick a target. And what that looks like is you focus on one customer or one actor kind of in this process and their experience at the crucial moment in your product, or in their experience, or their, this could be like a need or like an experience in the product. These maps can take lots of different forms depending on the actual crew that you're working with. So you can see here like these how might we's that ended up here, and that's kind of like a part of the process that I'll gloss over and not talk about. But go read the book if you want to know more about that. Tuesday you'll be sketching. So you've identified kind of like where you want to go in the area that you want to focus on, and then you get to this part. But before you actually start like sketching ideas and solutions, you're going to see what's been done before in a process they call remix and improve. And the idea here is that you have people come in and do lightning demos. They're like 2-minute little kind of demos of the inspiration that they found. I like to give this as homework before so that people can kind of like come in and prepare, and you can save a little bit of time. So you just tell people like anything that you think could help with this process, anything you could draw inspiration from. Could be like a website, could be like a candy bar wrapper, it could be like something that you found on the street on the way home. Bring that in and show it to us and tell us why you think it's great. And again, going through these, the facilitator's actually up at the whiteboard, like doing very rough sketches of each like big, lightning demo, and they're going to ask for like, okay, what's the big idea here, and write a title above that. And so at the end, you'll probably have like 20 or 25 kind of like big ideas that you've identified as a group, and that you can consult later on through the process as you go through the sketches. So what do those sketches look like? Of course, they look like this. Not quite, right? So they actually look like this at the end of the day. But before you even get to that, you're kind of going to go through this like synthesize. You're going to synthesize all the information and kind of like collate and just kind of work through, like, because by now there's like probably hundreds of sticky notes like up on the walls, and you've got all these like 2 or 3 whiteboards full of stuff, and you just kind of need to like process and sift through everything. And so it's really like a 4-step process to get to that thing. And what that 4-step process looks like is you just walk around the room for like 10 or 20 minutes, you're taking notes, and then you're taking some of what you identified as the best ideas here, and maybe like writing some like short sentences about further direction, and then maybe starting to do some like rough sketches. And then you're going to get to an exercise called Crazy Eights, and this is, there's variations on how much time you should spend on each of these panels, but it's just a legal piece of paper, and you fold it 8 ways, and you take what you think is your most promising idea or solution from here, and do 8 iterations of it to really explore, just make sure you've explored kind of all sides. Oftentimes, your best ideas end up being the like first or second one, but the idea here is that you just want to go through and make sure that you've explored everything you can. And then after that, like okay, I've got this one here and I like this one the best, and then you do 3 3x5 sticky notes on a legal piece of paper with a catchy title for what your solution sketch is. And these are just 3 panels, and so they could correspond to 3 different clicks. Yes, question? Correct, yes. Everybody's doing this on their own. All this is done basically silently. Facilitator, of course, is introing all these things and saying, okay, this is what you do now. And you have the timer here that you're setting for each one of these activities to make sure you keep everybody on track. So, yeah, like I mentioned, at the end of the day, you're going to end up with a bunch of sketches that look like this. This should not be like multi-paragraph exposition about how this thing works. If a person can't walk up and tell like what's happening just from this, it's not a good sketch. And you need to go back and try again. This is really, like, obviously this is not high fidelity, and there's just going to be like some things that need a bit more explication to describe, and you can kind of get some context for what that looks like here. So, you end the day on Tuesday, and trust me, you're exhausted because you've been making decisions for 2 days now, and it's very unlikely that you're going to have enough time at the end of the day on Tuesday to make a decision about which sketch to go with. So you put them all in a stack, then on Wednesday morning, you come in and you're going to make a decision. Now, decisions about this kind of stuff, endless debate, anybody? How do you do it? How do you avoid the endless debate about which way to go with the sketches? This is where those little sticky dots come into play. Basically, you take your masking tape and you put up all the sketches on the wall. At this point, nobody knows who's done what, in theory. Hopefully, you don't know your teammate's handwriting well enough to be able to tell. But yeah, you put them up on the wall and nobody knows who's who. And then everybody gets stickers and they walk around and they can vote on what they think is the best sketch. They can vote on their own. They can vote on other people's. You get a couple of stickers so you can split your votes if you want, or stick them all on your own. I mean, that's what I like to do. So, yeah, so you silently choose just the best sketches. And then after everybody's gone through, the decider actually has the ultimate say, and they get a special sticker, of course, and they select what they think is the best one. You do eventually get to kind of like give your sales pitch about why you think yours is like the best way forward, but it's also time boxed. Like everybody gets like 2 minutes, but you only get to do that at the very end, because really what ends up happening is like everybody gets like 3 minutes to like tear yours down and say like everything they think is wrong with it, and then you finally get your chance to say your piece and maybe get to show some of your fancy sales techniques off. But again, like the way this process is structured is to minimize kind of like some people are just better at sales than others, and it doesn't mean their idea is good. So yeah, so you've probably decided at this point, but there's also a second option here. If there's two sketches that the decider thinks like, hey, these are both really good examples of solutions, but they're not going to both fit in the same storyboard. So we can do a rumble. And the rumble is basically, it's like a head-to-head battle between these two very, very different sketches. So what it does is it splits the team up, and basically they work on two different prototypes. And you test both of the prototypes on Friday. So that's pretty exciting stuff. So whether you go with a rumble or you just choose one sketch as the winner, you go to the storyboard on the last half of Wednesday. And what the storyboard ends up looking like is really this. So it's really no more than like 15 sort of like views here. And they basically all correspond to like one click along this customer journey. And this is from Blue Bottle Coffee's design sprint here, and they were designing their e-commerce website, and in particular the checkout process. So yeah, it's again, I mean, all this is just words and boxes, and obviously like, hey, you don't have to be a great artist to do this. And one thing that you do want to try to focus on is just like getting as much detail in this as possible, so that when you get to Thursday, when you're building the prototype, there's no unanswered questions about what to do, or like what copy goes where and all that kind of stuff. You want to make sure that you get all your copy out of the way, no lorem ipsum, any of that kind of stuff. So you finish your storyboard here on time, and then you get to Thursday and you're going to prototype. Prototype is meant to be just basically a Wild West set, right? It's it's a business in the front and then fake in the back. It's just a realistic facade, and that's really all that your customers are going to need to actually interact with it and see if it actually meets their use case and fulfills their needs. So they suggest in the Sprint book that people use Keynote to do this. I mean, you know, Keynote, Sketch, Illustrator, InVision. I've used all these things for this process. You just have to be careful to like not focus too much on the detail of the thing because you only have one day to build this. And it's easy to get bogged down and get distracted, and then you end up like end of day on Thursday, and you only have half the thing done. So you know, this kind of, it's like very sort of like tricky process to figure out like how much is enough to convince the customer that this is like a real thing, but also not enough like that this takes you like, you know, 5 weeks. So we're finally to Friday, and this is test day. So pop quiz, how many people do you think it takes to find the vast majority of the issues or problems with your prototype? I'm talking like 85%. I know some of you have just read the book. Alex? How many? Customers, do you need to interview to find 85% of the problems with the prototype? 5, that's right. So people are often surprised by this, and this number was originally established by Jacob Nielsen back in the early 90s, and Nielsen is kind of like a grandfather of usability testing and just general like research about how people interact with stuff on the web. And they had done like a ton of these like usability tests and user interviews and testing of prototypes, and they looked back at all of their experience with it and asked, okay, well, at what point did we stop learning new stuff? And they found that 5 was this magic number. So after 5, they kept hearing pretty much the same thing over and over and over again, and it was just diminishing returns to the point where it didn't make sense to do more than 5. So that's the good news. The bad, this sounds simple. It's just 5 one-on-one interviews. You got one person facilitating this process, and they're there to just talk to the customer and sort of guide them through the process and you know, test these different things. The bad news is that user interviews are really tricky. All of the normal ways that you sort of like talk to people on a day-to-day basis won't work and will actually mislead your users or your customers. So I had, at the beginning of the year, I'd never done user interviews before, and I was like, okay, I need to do user interviews. So I started like doing a lot of research, and I put together kind of this is a little compendium of user interview rules. And this is only 9 of them. There's like 15 that I identified of like really key, like high value things to watch out for when you're doing user interviews. So if you want to learn more about that, check out browise.com. So Friday, like the team is all still together, and they're watching this happen from another room. So you've got like a camera set up, and it's live streaming what's going on, these user interviews, and they're taking notes and watching everything. So like that way they're like checking your interpretations of the stuff that was said, and making sure that, you know, you're just not bullshitting. At the end of the day, it'll probably be pretty clear what you need to do next. And then if things are broken and they didn't quite work out right, you can go through this process again, and you can fix and test again. And so the second and third run of the sprint process is going to go a lot quicker. So like the second time probably take about 3 days, and the third time will take about 2. I actually found, just to say like their time, like talking about their time estimates here, I actually found that their time estimates for like how much you needed to time box these different activities were kind of like eerily accurate. That it was like almost like, for like the different sketching exercises or like synthesizing the information before you actually get to the sketches, like they sort of, I think it was like 20 minutes for that, like first thing. And it was like right on the money where people were like sort of like starting to lag a little bit, like they'd written and kind of synthesized all they needed to. And then it was like time for it. So I think you can really see that they've like tweaked this process quite a lot over like however many hundreds of times they've run it with their portfolio companies. And so, again, that's another really great thing. Okay, so what about in the real world? Adaptive design sprints, what does that mean? Well, one of the things that they say about this whole process is that you want to make sure that you're picking high-risk, high-value targets. So if something it seems like, okay, this is like a sure thing, we could implement this, and it would end up being a great thing, like we're almost certain, that's probably not something that you want to prototype. You want to prototype the thing that you're not sure about, but also the thing that you anticipate could be really high value. And so the question is, what if you have kind of like a process, like some product that you need to build, but you also know that, that the paths to these kind of things are like well-worn and already well-tested with other people, and you know that your target isn't going to be like necessarily high risk. That opportunity came to me through Society of Work. So Society of Work is a client of mine, and they came to me and they said, hey, Brett, we want to think about redesigning the website. And so I said, okay. There was kind of some constraints on that process where it was like, we don't have 5 days. And I said, okay, well, like, how many, what do you have? And it was, I said 2 hours. So that's an interesting problem. And I think it actually ended up working out pretty well because of the fact of, like I was just talking about, how basically the stuff they wanted to do wasn't high risk, right? We knew that like there was a whole range of options that we could take that would be low risk but high value, and so there were certain parts of this design sprint that we could cut out, and so I came up with kind of like a micro design sprint, and what that looked like is basically like number one is like priming all of the people that were going to be a part of this, and I did that with this thing. So it's just like a basic outline of the process, and you can see here that like I've time boxed these things like very, very tight time constraints, and so I sent this out and I said, okay guys, like I want you to get the lightning demos like ready and come in, hit the ground running, and Kelly, who runs the Society of Work, I was like, okay, you do the map. And I kind of like primed her about how to do that and accomplish it and bring that in, because like we're all independent consultants up there who are helping her, the designer, me, the web developer, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, I think we can do this in 2 hours. We can get to doing the storyboarding. I don't think that there's probably not much that we really are going to need after the storyboard in terms of like prototyping and testing with real customers. I'm sure it would be useful, but again, like these are well-worn paths, and kind of like the way to do this stuff is pretty well established. So I sent this out, and then we get in the room, right? And I say, okay, like everybody's ready. Like, how many of you checked out the outline? And of course, everybody was like, they didn't read it, and I think that was probably because of my own blind spot, which is that I look at stuff like this all day, and so when you look at stuff like this all day, stuff like this doesn't look bad. Like for a normal person, like this will make your eyes bleed, and I think that we forget that. And so when I send a wall of text, I expect people just like, oh, like consume this, but not everybody is like comfortable with that. They're like, TLDR, right? So yeah, what I feel like I learned from that is I would not send a wall of text next time. I probably would just do a video of me talking into a camera for 5 minutes and introing it that way, because that's a lot more easy to consume for your average audiences, for people who don't look at that stuff all day. Anyway, so that was an interesting process. I got really great feedback through this. I mean, you're making a lot of concessions here. You're making a lot of compromises in time boxing everything so tightly like this. But I can say that doing this is better than not doing it. So it definitely helped kind of like push the whole process, and having everybody in the room at the same time and minimizing endless debate and brainstorming and all that. Like, these are all really great things that you can take away and adapt for your own purposes. And so what I can say is a micro design sprint, in my experience, you cannot do in 2 hours with the storyboarding. That's just an impossibility. I think you could do it in an afternoon, so like 4 hours. I think it would be doable then, because we got up to here, and then it was the storyboarding. But even that storyboarding process, you could easily take 2 hours on. So especially if you're doing more than just like, hey, we're redesigning this page. Like, if it's the whole process, you know, it's doable, but you just need time to do it. The Google Ventures guys have said they've done full redesign of vendor marketplaces through the sprint process. So it's definitely doable, but you know, you just have to watch your time on this stuff. Anyway, so I did a micro one, and then after that I did a full sort of full design sprint. It was a 4-day design sprint, and this was for a newsroom. Nougat.com is a client of mine, and several months ago we began a conversation about you know, what changes to make on the site and identifying the highest value ones to work on. So working in a newsroom environment is a little bit different, right? It's really an impossibility for the core team to take a full 5 days off, because they don't really do a lot of reporting on the weekends over at Nougat, and so what you're talking about is asking them to take 9 days off without news, and there's just no way that they can write ahead news 9 days, right? So what I was able to convince them of is to write ahead for 2 days. So they took off Thursday and Friday, and then we did Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, which I knew going in that it was going to be tough, because everybody was going to do a full work week and then come in and make all the decisions, and I was totally right about that. It was pretty exhausting, but it was really the only way to do it. And again, it was either this way or not do it at all, and it was better to do it. So we did. And so some interesting things about that process were that we did not have our UI designer in the room. UI designer is a contractor, and there was no way that, and works a full-time job of his own, and there was no way that we could get him in there. So another reason for doing it over the weekend too was that we could bring him in on Sunday to come and implement what we did on the storyboard like that. And so to kind of shore up some of those shortcomings, every day I would just call him or send him emails about this is what we accomplished today, these are the things we decided, just to kind of try to pull him in and keep him in the process. I think you know, because of that shortcoming, we ended up basically biting off more than we could chew in terms of the UI design on Sunday, which ended up being all right, because as it turns out, through the process, you're on the traditional Wednesday, you're supposed to start trying to recruit your users to test with. And the way that Google Ventures suggests, is you write kind of a sort of broad screener questionnaire, right, that you just put on Craigslist. And there's certain things that you know, you know, maybe you ask somebody do you work in the shipping industry? Do you work in marketing? Do you work at McDonald's? You know, and they don't know what you're looking for, and so maybe they answer marketing, and that's the thing that disqualifies them, because you're not interested in, you know. So you build the screeners this way. All that to say, when I ended up on Sunday, I had only one person booked. It turns out that Nougat readers, by and large, all work on Mondays. So we couldn't do the user interviews anyway. So that was kind of another sort of pivot point that I had to adapt. So we ended up working a little bit more on the prototype, and then scheduled folks for later on. So, of course, the problem with that is that once everybody disseminates and goes out from that room, they all get back to work. And it's very, very easy for them to kind of like forget about all the stuff that they've like figured out in that room. And one of the things that you want to make sure to implement as a facilitator after the fact is at least like weekly meetings for folks to like meet and organize themselves so that those things they identified in the process that they can keep working on those. And the reason I say that is because you're gonna probably, in both of my experiences, you end up discovering a lot of stuff that you're not gonna prototype, but there's just not like a compelling story for it in your product. And that, in some ways, I think that's almost like a more high value thing. All these like little things that you end up discovering through that, and sort of like things that you know are high value but low risk, and that you can just go ahead and just like throw it in and do it. That stuff is really, really great, and yeah, I'm sure you'll find the same thing. So to recap, what we learned, you know, these things are, I think, for high value, high risk, sort of like UX focused type projects. Yeah, Alex and I were actually talking about this last night. At Carbon 5, they just read this book as well, and Alex astutely pointed out that all of the kind of like case studies that they point out in the book are stuff that's kind of like based around like first impressions. They don't. So, you know, that's like very different from like if you were designing like an API or something, right? So I don't know, you know, for like a hardcore sort of like engineering design process, I've sort of been thinking about like, what does that look like? I don't know, I don't have the answer yet. So the other thing was like how to run kind of like an design sprints and turn them into kind of like micro design sprints for sort of like lower risk projects. Also, like I think there's a lot of like high value stuff, like if you work with clients that like I do, and you just go in, you don't know anything about their business process, like the first like 4 or 5 steps on like day 1 that you go through, this is like really fantastic stuff to implement and use to like get inside their business process and figure out what the product is, and really identify like where you can kind of come help and add the most value. You know, and then how to, you know, sort of like alter full design sprints to work with special constraints like we did at Nuga, and that's pretty much it. Do we have any questions? Any questions at all? Yes. Right. Yeah, actually, great question. So the question was, this mostly seems focused on software. What about hardware? Yes, actually, one of the case studies in the book is from a company called Savioke, which they build concierge robots, and that can deliver, you know, like toothbrushes and towels and stuff to people in their hotel rooms. And so, yes, it definitely works for hardware, this process. They've done it and proven it does. In this case, they were able to, they actually had enough kind of like prototype kind of robots sitting around that they could like pull all that stuff together and do this. If that's not the case, you know, often like obviously you can't build like a hardware product in 5 days in most cases like they were able to. And in that case, what they suggest is building a brochure and testing the brochure with your customers instead. Yeah, so the question was, how do you find out, is this thing actually useful to the customer? So one of the assumptions I think that you're sort of making is that the people that you're pulling into this process are really intimately acquainted with their customer, or at least one of the people in the room is, right? And they know those customer needs, and so they can kind of help speak to that and guide that process. You know, you probably, you know, like on an average like software project, you're probably going to have your UX person in there, and they've done all the like UX research with the customers, and so they have a very they have a finger on that pulse. If you don't know, then your stuff is going to be much lower quality. But I think that's kind of like one of the assumptions made in it. Alex?
Who would you pull in for this process? Say no more than 7 people.
Yeah.
What are good people to bring?
So you've got to do your facilitator right, your decider, generally your CEO, and then you're probably going to have the person on your team that does the bulk of your UI design. You're going to pull those folks in. Engineers, front end, back end, those folks are going to be important because they're going to be able to tell you, like, is this thing like actually technically feasible or not? Maybe the marketing. Yeah. I don't know. You guys have run, processes like this a bunch. I know not exactly like this, but what folks do you typically pull in for this? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think bringing in marketing is really good because a lot of
Yeah, for sure. I think we're time for one more. Yeah, just personally reaching out. I had to do that in both cases, pretty much. Basically just like reaching out and being like, hey, can I come talk with you? And then just explaining, kind of like give a high-level overview of the process and explain to them like why they have to be in there. And in both cases, like they both signed on. So if you know the process and kind of like how great it really is, and sort of how hamstrung it will be if they're not there, and can convey that, then I think it's a pretty easy sell. All right. One more.
how big of a project?
Well, it could be really just about anything, and that I think that's kind of like the thing that you have to learn just from experience because in the Nuga one that we did, I think we bit off like a little bit more than we should have, and we made a ton of decisions, and all of it was really great. And I think that's just something that you kind of like. I don't know. Maybe it's just me. Like maybe it's just personally me that I have more of a tendency to bite off more than I can chew. Maybe that's not what everybody would do. So I tend to think because of that bias that you're probably more apt to try to do too much than to do too little. One more. Yeah. Do you want to grab the mic? Mic over here. One announcement. Come on up. Come on up.
No dice. There we go. Hey everyone, I'm Tom. I run the Ruby meetup. I am on ChaiDev. T. Richards. I'm the one with the green and white icon. I want to remind everyone this upcoming Tuesday, May 31st, is our monthly Ruby meetup in which we are doing an Arch install party. So come on out, bring your PC. We're going to do some Linux. We're going to do Arch install. It's going to be good. Be sure to see us there. There will be food and stickers and all sorts of fun stuff. No prior knowledge necessary. You don't have to know anything about Ruby, Linux, whatever. Just come on out. We're going to have a great time.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, guys.